All right, and I think we are live. Let's see if we got people strolling in. Yep, I see participants already online. Thank you for joining for this webinar. This is the QSC Work From Home webinar series edition. Let me introduce myself and everybody that's on the phone. We have a couple of familiar faces. Nate McCarrick is our senior training manager. You should recognize his face from a lot of the thousands of videos that are on the interwebs. Say hi, Nate.
We apologize profusely for the amount of time you've spent with our face and our voice.
That's right. He's also got his dog Kylie today because he's on babysitting duty. She's a terrible dog.
She's a terrible dog. No one likes that dog.
Yeah. We also have Jacob Hunter. If you've ever submitted a Q-SYS design or a question on the website, you will have interacted with Jacob. Jacob, just quickly say hi.
Hey guys.
Jacob's going to be administering a lot of the Q&A, and we'll talk about this in a second. But our guest of honor is actually Eric Marchitelli. He is an application engineer for QSC systems. He works primarily with Q-SYS, but he really runs the gamut, a very talented engineer. Test your mic, Eric. Let's make sure it's working.
Hey, everybody. You hear me?
Cool. All right. A couple of quick ground rules, and actually they're not so much rules. They're actually going to enable a community to occur, essentially. This is not going to be just us talking to you. We highly encourage you to throw questions into that Q&A, and we actually have the ability to enable your VoIP. So if you're feeling brave and you have a headset like this, or you're in a quiet space, just let us know in the Q&A, hey, I don't mind addressing this question on the VoIP, and it will actually let you ask a question and interact with Eric or myself or Nate or Jacob. So be brave, throw your questions in there. And with that, we're gonna do, this is the Just Add Camera and Video. So if you have not seen how Q-SYS integrates cameras and videos, if this is new to you, this is really the webinar for you. If you've gone through some trainings on our website on how to do these things, this is probably just going to be a recap. But the focus of today's engagement is going to show you how quickly you can do this. We are going to intentionally editorialize some of the features. We're not going to go over every feature. Again, the point of today's webinar is going to be all about how quickly I can go into a room, integrate both PTZ cameras and HDMI video distribution in a room with essentially almost no programming, certainly no scripting whatsoever, all just drag and drop operations. So let's quickly just kind of set the stage for what we see as the connected conference room, shall we? Nate, again, we might have some folks that are new to Q-SYS, so go ahead and take us away on this slide.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how the the AV industry sort of grew up, we had a lot of different companies that were all very good at their specific thing. So you had a company that was really good at audio and DSP, and another company that was really good at integrating video, and someone else who made the control processors, who had to make everything else talk to each other. But none of those were really designed to work with each other. They were all sort of invented in their own silos and then forced to work with each other. And to make them all integrate, you kind of had a lot of band-aid solutions to make these connections happen that weren't really natively designed. And that gets even worse as you go, deeper into the IT world. IT departments, they see new things coming into their environments, and they're like, "Hey, what is this? This doesn't work like the IT technology that I'm used to deploying, and why not? Why doesn't AV exist at that level?" And the answer is that it can. Someone just had to come along and sort of wrap it up under one umbrella, and that's what the Q-SYS ecosystem is. That's audio, video, and control that's designed to work with each other from the get-go, so that you don't have to script all those complicated interactions between different devices.
So let's go over the fundamentals of that meeting room. Like there are tons of things you can do in a meeting room, but again, we're talking about the fundamentals today. And as we see it, the fundamentals are three things. You need to be able to control that meeting room, connect to a web conferencing app, and then get your content on the screen. And realistically, the bonus would also be, it would be nice that when your end users walk into that room, that they had the confidence of knowing that somebody else might be monitoring this room so that they don't have to encounter a room that's broken. They have the confidence that, yeah, somebody's got my back in this room and is monitoring all the integrity of the system and can help me if something were to happen. So this is the way our modern conference room looks. And again, we're going to build, believe it or not, most of this today. We're not going to focus on any of the network shade controls or the lighting controls, but the important thing to note is that there are pieces outside of the Q-SYS ecosystem that we can also integrate with some of our control engine opportunities.
Which we've done as a webinar with Patrick and I. So if you want to dig that up, it's certainly available. When it comes to controlling the room, in that other webinar about controlling all those things, we showed a variety of ways in which you can do that. Some things are super easy. Some things you can just put on the touchscreen right in front of you by dragging it out of the schematic and directly onto that UCI so that the end user has control of it. Some things may require more complicated interactions. You may need to dig up your Lua scripting credentials. We have a couple tools to make it easier. So it's like the block controller, which is a visual coding tool. But we have a lot of tools embedded inside the software to make connection to those third-party devices a lot easier to integrate.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges we've seen with cameras integration in particular. So there are a lot of USB cameras. Actually, I'm talking on one right now. They're great for home, but they're not always the best when you try to integrate them into these kind of larger, 3 to 4 person rooms and beyond. And that's because, as we know, HDMI and USB, you can't field terminate them. They have length extensions. So it's really a problem of geography, because you're either dealing with those length extensions or you're trying to integrate these terrible workarounds like these HDMI matrices and USB extension cords that are both expensive and super duper unreliable. So with Q-SYS, we have solved that problem with the network. Why not use the network to its full advantage and use these other technologies like USB and HDMI to their advantages? We're not saying that USB is terrible. We're saying use USB in the right way. You do your long runs of transport via a Cat5 or higher, and then at the table where the end user needs to integrate their system, or in the rack where the PC needs to integrate with the processor, that's a good use of those short run USB cables. And that's essentially what you're looking at here. Use as much of the network as you can, and then at the point at which that thing needs to interact with the PC, use that USB cable.
Yeah. I was going to add on to that.
Yep.
Again, keep in mind that means that's the camera, it gets its power and its control and the video all on that one Cat5 cable. And for an installer, that's the right option. Rather than trying to run power and a USB extension, all kinds of things in places they're not really designed to be run.
That's right. So that's what we've done with this Q-SYS camera. So this is the QSC, or the Q-SYS PTZ camera. We have 2 different models, and essentially what it does is it collects HDMI video, transports it via the network, and then delivers it via an AV bridge via universal USB, which means that there's no drivers that you need to install. It also means that it works with nearly every web conferencing application out there. So Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Skype for Business, WebEx, all of them use USB as this kind of universal way to integrate audio and video. And of course, these cameras work with those. So actually, before we go on from that, I'm going to turn it over to any of the questions. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, which is either a good thing or you've all fallen asleep. I hope it's not the latter.
I mean, Kylie's asleep. We've already bored her, so.
That's true. But I am interested to see how to do this in Q-SYS. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Eric take the helm and let him show us how to do this in Q-SYS. And again, I'm going to set a little timer because this is in fact a super easy thing to do in Q-SYS.
All right, let's see. So I'm just going to share my screen here.
And we see it. Thank you.
So you see it. So here's my Q-SYS designer. So this is a design I already had running. So this is basically your basic bare bones conference room. Could also be a classroom or any other kind of room where you have kind of microphones in. I have my acoustic echo canceller already in there, some mic processing, and then I have an amplifier and a set of speakers. So this is your basic conference room. So now say I wanted to add video to this conference room. It's really easy to do in Q-SYS. Switch here. So to do that, I have my I/O USB bridge, which Patrick and Nate just talked about. So this allows me, this is made to sit under a conference table or in a credenza or a lectern or something. And this allows, this is what bridges your PC to the Q-SYS ecosystem. It gives you your audio in from your room microphones and your room out to your room speakers and into our cameras. And then I also have our camera here, one of our cameras. And all I need to do to add these to the system is basically just plug this in. This is a PoE device. So you see it's PoE. And I'm just going to plug that in via PoE, and that'll bring it up on my network. And then the same thing with the bridge. I'll bring the bridge in, plug that in PoE. Now those will just take a second to boot up. And then once those are online, I go to my, I go back to my Q-SYS Designer software, and I go to Tools and Configurator. I'll see that they pop up in there. So if you're not familiar with Q-SYS Designer or the Q-SYS, that's our software package. That's where you do everything. That's where all your devices show up. That's where you build your conference room. That's where you route all your audio, all of your control. You design your UCI. So everything is done within this Q-SYS Designer software. So now that I have my two devices online and powered up, I need to add them into my project. So like everything in Q-SYS, it starts on the left-hand side in this inventory pane. So you can see I already have an amplifier. I have my core. My core is the central unit that runs the whole system. That's the brain. That's your control processor, your audio processor, your DSP, all in one box. So you can see I have a Core 110F. And then I have two speakers. I have two of our little 4-inch speakers. And I have the touchscreen controller, which we'll design a UCI for later. So just get rid of these. So we'll add them back later. But so if I click this little plus icon here, I go down to my video tab, and the two new devices I'm looking for is the I/O USB bridge. So that's this one on the top here. If I click that, it'll add it right over into my left-hand side. And then also the camera. I have a 12x72 camera. So I click that, and that'll add that. Now they show up in my inventory pane, and I can drag these into my design. So I'm currently in Designer. I'm in Designer mode. I'm disconnected from a system. This is just running right on my laptop. And then we have to build our design in Designer. And then once it's built, then we push it to the system. And then everything should show up. So I'm going to just bring this camera, this block here, this camera block. I'm going to just bring this right into my this little spot I already have designated for it. And then I'm going to do the same with my I/O bridge. I'm going to bring its, actually, the first things I need to do is I need to select my bridge and go into my right-hand pane, and under properties, I just need to enable the bridging of the unit. So every device you see in the inventory actually has a properties on the right-hand side where you name it, where you can set it as redundant. So most of our devices have dual NIC cards on dual network ports, so they could run redundantly on networks. But for right now, I can leave that all as default. But I do want to enable the video bridge. So by enabling this is going to allow the camera video to be transported over the network and then out over USB to my laptop. And then I also want to enable the audio bridge. And that's going to allow my microphone, my in-room microphone, and my in-room speakers to be connected to my laptop, to my soft codec, whichever soft codec I'm running. And by doing it this way, it allows me to use any codec, anything I could run on my laptop, whether it's Zoom or Skype or Blue Jeans or Google, anything I run is just over USB. So if I'm going to set that as a speakerphone, and now you'll see that I have more blocks here on my left-hand side that I can bring into Designer. So I have my speakerphone in block, which I'm going to drag into my design. I'm going to put that over in my input section. Basically what that is this is going to be the audio coming in from my laptop. So that's any PC audio or also the audio from the far end caller. So I'm going to drop that there. And then my USB speakerphone out block, which I'm going to bring over to my output side. Basically, this is the audio that's going to transfer from my PC and then out over the internet.
Hey, Eric, we've got a question.
Sure.
Easy one. Just can you quickly define the difference between the speakerphone connection and the sound card connection on that USB bridge?
Yeah, so basically this has to do with the way that it's going to be recognized over USB by your PC. When you set it to speakerphone, it'll usually show up in Windows or your Mac as a communications device. If you were to set it to sound card, it would show up as a USB sound card device. So that really has to do with the USB. You could also you could set a speakerphone and a sound card, and that would allow you to have even more blocks show up in the right-hand side, and you could pass more channels of audio over USB. So I just chose speakerphone because it's the simplest for this demonstration.
Hey, Andrew, does that answer your question?
Yeah, could you maybe provide an example of where you would use sound card over speakerphone?
Sure. So a sound card is basically if you have if you're using your PC to stream audio to a system, if you have a PC running some kind of music software or some kind of software where you're going to play files from a PC, where you're not really worried about recording audio onto the PC, but you just want to get audio, high quality audio from a PC into the Q-SYS system, that's when I would use a sound card because it'll show up in Windows as a sound output device, a line out device. By using it as a speakerphone, it shows up in Windows as a communication device. It's going to be the same quality audio. It's just kind of the way that Windows or Mac or the operating system handles it.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew.
So I'm going to just wire this the speakerphone input right into this mixer. I already had this mixer in here. So this is going to allow the sound coming from my computer to be presented over my speakers and mixed through into my in-room audio. And I'm going to, on the other side, on the output, this is what's going to allow the far end caller to hear us and hear my microphones. So that looks good. Now, if I go down to my camera, you can see I'm not actually connected, so I can't see it, but my camera, now I need to tell my camera where it's going to be connected to. So I'm going to bring in this USB video bridge block, and I'm going to drop that here and connect it this way. If I had more than one camera, for this demo, I only have one physical camera, but if I had multiple QSC cameras, up to, I don't really even think there's a hard limit really, I could bring in a device called the camera router that would allow me to switch through them. So there is the ability to switch cameras, but for this demo, I only have one camera.
I think that limit, actually, we made a video about that, Nate. I think is it 250 or 50? It's
either 50 or 250, you're right. One of those is the number of cameras available. One of those is the number of bridges available, I believe.
Yeah, hey, I'll research that while Eric is going.
So now that I have this wired up, I'm ready to push it to the system. One more advanced thing I'm going to do that's not really necessary is I have some presets set on my camera here that I want to be able to recall on my camera. I have these presets already set up. So I'm just going to do, and this is more kind of one of the control features of Q-SYS. You can expose pins on different devices. So I'm going to expose the coordinates pin on my camera, and it's actually going to connect to this selector where I have some predetermined coordinates already entered into. So I'm just going to, by using our signal tags, I'm going to do that. But obviously, this is kind of just an optional step here.
I found that number, 250 cameras and 50 bridges.
Oh, I'm so good.
That's a lot in the conference room. Okay, so now I have this set up. The last thing I need to do is I just need to name my devices in here. So that way when I push them, my system actually knows where to find them on the network. So if I go to Tools and open up the configurator, and I look down, so this is showing me all the different Q-SYS devices I have on my physical network. So right now, everything on my demo system is just connected to the same local switch. So I'm seeing I have my amplifier, I have the camera, so there's the camera, and I see that its name is PTZ12X-1985. So in my inventory, my camera here, I just need to match that name. So PTZ-12X72 1985. And then I need to do the same thing for my bridge. So my bridge is showing up here as IOUSB-NJ. I went ahead and I think I've named these in advance. If you have a brand new system and you plug these in, they're just going to have a generic name. There'll be IOUSB bridge dash, and I think it'll be like the last 4 digits of its MAC address or something. So it'll be a unique name, but you have the ability to name it whatever you want to. Just make sure that the names match on the hardware and in your design. So that looks good. So now I should be ready to push this to my system. So if I go to File and Save to Core and Run, it will check the firmware, make sure the firmware on all the systems matches. It'll update it. If not, if it doesn't match, it'll update all the peripheral devices while it's loading. Okay. Okay. So once that's loaded, the last thing I need to do is I just need to take my I/O bridge here and plug my laptop. So I have a USB cable coming from my laptop, and I'm going to plug that into the bridge. And I may lose your audio for a second because it's going to probably automatically switch me over to my, so now, let's see here, I'm going to switch over to my speakerphone. So now I should be hearing my audio come through Q-SYS.
We are.
Cool. And I hear you coming out through my speakers in my room. And now I'm going to change my camera as well. Let's see here. Actually, I'm going to grab this camera and I'm going to move it to the other end of the room. That way you can see me.
Yeah, no problem. While he does that, I'm going to drive a finer point on what just happened. I counted 4 blocks. You know, Eric was doing a lot of explaining, and so he was spending some time doing, you know, helping the audience explain what was happening. But he essentially dragged 4 blocks, connected 2 pieces to each other, and renamed 2 things. Had he not been playing to the audience, that would have taken about 2 minutes. So again, this is a super easy thing to do.
Yeah, even that selector tool that he had that's setting up the presets for the PTZ coordinates, that component is a single drag and drop, and then he just filled in some predetermined angles for it. So that was another 30 seconds probably.
Okay, so I'm back, and you should see me now.
Hey guys, we have a quick question from Ed. Is there an option to upgrade firmware manually on devices, or is it always automatic?
So the way the firmware works in Q-SYS is it's based on the version of Designer. So currently we're on Designer 8.2.2. So anytime it depends on what firmware you load to the core. So if you load firmware 8 onto the core, every peripheral that's connected in that system will have to be upgraded to match what's running on the core. And that happens automatically when you push the file to the system, to the core.
Ed, does that answer your question? Ed's feeling bashful. No problem. I think it did.
He says yes, and he has no mic.
Sorry, Ed.
And that's really it. So now my camera, my mics are coming through. I'm hearing you through my system in my room. I'm coming through you through a Q-SYS mic. So that's really all it takes to add a camera and some microphones into a Q-SYS system.
Now, I just want to clarify, do we make monitors and laptops? I'm seeing a lot of QSC logos on your gear there.
I think that just means that, yeah, Eric is drinking the QSC Kool-Aid, and I appreciate him. Are we, remind me, Eric, are we building the UCI at the end, or are we progressing on to NV now? Because essentially, we've done it. We've hooked up the QSYS camera. That's all that there is to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the next thing we'll do is we'll get some video into the
all right. So let me, I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Give me 1 second. There we go. So that was the camera. Again, that was pretty quick. I'm going to turn my video on too. There we go. So let's talk a little bit about the other part of that equation. We said one of the necessary thing was to get from your BYOD computer or that rack mount PC and transport that video up to the screen, or quite frankly, anywhere on the network. We have a Q-SYS device for that. It is called the NV series. You are looking at a singular device. This is not a mistake. We are doing both encoding and decoding on the same device. It is completely software definable, which again is going to simplify you needing to carry multiple SKUs, or if your design happens to change midway through and you had an extra NV, you just change that thing in the software and it becomes what you need it to become. Let's take a little look at what we got on the back in terms of the I/O. 3 HDMI inputs, and again, you're able to load as many as 3 HDMI streams at 1080p, or one of those at 4K. And again, 2 HDMI outputs. So if you're running it at 1080, you can stream multiple streams at the same time, which we'll cover in a little couple later slides on. And again, one of the major benefits of what you just saw was Eric showed us how to hook up a USB bridge to do your AV bridging. Well, if you're using an NV device at the table, this device actually replaces that as well. So this is running not only HDMI distribution, but it's also taking care of all of that video and audio that needs to stream to your soft codec device. Let's go ahead and advance one more time.
We got a couple of questions if we can pause for a second.
Of course.
One, let's see. We actually just have a curiosity of what mic is, I believe, Eric using.
Eric, go ahead.
Right now, I'm just using an old Audio-Technica little boundary mic, plugged in, going directly into the Core 110F balanced.
I see a couple other questions. I'm going to unmute Kurt. I think these are pretty easy, but I'm going to open them up anyway. He's asked the question, let's see, it disappeared for a second. Do you need AVB if you plug directly into the core with a USB? And the answer is no. That is the other optional bridging device that you can use. If you're using a Core 110, you can use the USB port on the back to do bridging directly from the core, which means that you don't need a USB bridge if you're just running a short run from a rack-mounted core to a rack-mounted PC. You just run that directly from it. And then I saw this is all happening over 1 gigabit. Ian, of course, yes. All of Q-SYS is running over a standard gigabit switches and network. Okay, Nate, want to walk us through Shift?
So we have this thing called the Shift video codec, which is what we're using to move our video across the network. This is a codec that we invented specifically to handle different types of content and still give you the greatest amount of bandwidth on your network. So if you are broadcasting something that's very static, for instance, this screen right here, this PowerPoint presentation, has no movement on it, right? It's the same pixels every second. As we analyze that, we know that there's no change visually from second to second. So we're not going to refresh that bandwidth as much as we need to. We can drop down the bandwidth usage significantly when we're displaying static content to make sure that there's plenty of room for everything else, all your print jobs that are going on in the network that the IT guys might be worried about. That's not to say that we're not going to throttle that up again when there's full motion video. So assuming that you have live screens, cameras, content, media, whatever it is, when we're doing that, then we bring that bandwidth back up again so that we can move it across the gigabit network as reliably as we possibly can.
Yeah, the Shift codec is really kind of like that trifecta between quality, bandwidth, and latency. And a lot of other manufacturers, they'll focus on either the quality at the expense of the network or the opposite. So Again, this is a meeting room specific device. It is intended for meeting rooms, so it has been optimized for that, given that kind of trifecta necessity.
And in case the question comes up on latency, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the latency is less than 2 frames. Is that correct?
Correct. It is sub 2 frames. That is correct. I already talked about this. I jumped ahead a little bit. This device, again, consolidates the need for a bridging device. If you're going to use it at the table or in the rack, it's going to deliver all that stuff to the soft codec of your choice. So save a little money on your installation there. And because it has multiple outputs, it will accommodate certain kind of up-and-coming features that you're seeing in some of these rooms, some of these larger rooms that have dual screens. So, for example, if you had a room that you wanted to do collaboration in-room collaboration, oftentimes Nate and I will go into a conference room, we'll both have laptops, and we'll want to collaborate on something. And we're looking off each other's laptops, and it would be great if we could just both stream to that screen so we can both see each other's screen. With a lot of other devices, that might mean you need 2 encoders at the table, and then 2 decoders, one for each of those screens. With Q-SYS and with the NV series, it just means that you need 1 device at the table and then 1 device near the screens, and you've turned a relatively complicated installation into something that is achieved with just two endpoints. And with that, I'm going to, were there any other questions, Jacob, before we turn it over back to Eric to see how to integrate NV into the system?
Looks like we had a hand raised, but I'm not sure they actually had a question. Maybe it was just an accident.
Who was the hand raise?
Christopher Haynes. I've checked in with him.
Okay. I'm going to open up Christopher. Why not?
Sure.
Chris or Christopher, did you have a question before we move on? If not, he also might not have a microphone. So, all right. Well, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let Eric start to share.
Hold up. We do have a question. Just came in from
excellent.
Andrew wants to talk about the HDMI feed from the PTX camera into the NV.
The PTZ camera, I'm guessing. So I think the question is, what does the HDMI output do on the back of the HDMI camera? And I can either turn that over to Nate or to Eric.
Go for it, Eric.
Okay, yeah, so the HDMI, so you notice that the HDMI, the camera has in addition to the network port, an HDMI and an SDI output. Those are both active at 1080p 60. So they're simultaneously active with the network stream. So you can, in essence, hook them up to an external video router or something into a larger system.
All right, no more questions. Take it away, Eric.
Okay, so so the next thing we'll do, we'll add the video. So you see here, I have two NV32s. I have one here on the desk, which I'm going to use as an encoder. So I have a couple sources here. I have a media player and then another media player down there. And then behind me, I have one mounted behind me, which is connected via HDMI to the display, and that's going to be our decoder. So obviously, they're right next to each other, but in the real world, one would be, say, under a conference table or an lectern, and then this other one might be up behind displays or up in the ceiling at a projector location. So if I go back into, so I'm going to share my screen, and actually, even before I do that, let's make sure these are both connected. So let me pull up one of my presets here. So you see, here's my NV32. So that just needs, I have my devices plugged in already, HDMI. So HDMI 1 and 2, I have my NVIDIA Shield, and then I have a PlayStation down there plugged into it. So I need network, obviously, and power. This one I'm going to power locally. I'm going to power it with a local power supply, a 48 volt, 90 watt power supply. I'm going to plug that in, and then I'm just going to plug in the LAN cable. And then the only other things are connected HDMI. All my audio from my devices is going to be entered into the system via HDMI. And then this one behind me, I'm actually powering via PoE. It's PoE++ device, meaning it won't work with regular PoE or PoE+. It needs the newest standard, which is PoE++, which is a pretty beefy injector that I have powering that. So that is an option too. So that just has a network cable and then a single HDMI out to the display behind me. And you can see it's already outputting its default image showing its IP address and its system name and everything. So that's helpful when you're installing it. So let me share my screen. Let me go back into Designer.
Hey, right, but just before you jump into that, Eric, we got a question.
Sure.
The question is, what is the bandwidth usage for 4K video and USB? Other AV over IP systems require planning to make sure that the USB and video streams are not exceeding the network bandwidth.
Yep. So the bandwidth on any of our video streams maxes out at 800 millibytes per second. Or sorry, 800 megabits per second. So it won't ever hit that 1 gig cap. They max out using our shift codec. It maxes out at 800.
Right, and you can define a separate max if you want it to be less than 800, if you wanted it to only be 400 in the components, you can set that maximum for each device.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is going to be very similar to how we added our other I/O devices. So the first thing is back in Q-SYS Designer, I'm going to disconnect. Currently, I was live on the system. Now I just disconnected. And in my inventory pane, I'm going to hit a new inventory item. And down under this video tab, you'll see I have the second device down is the NV32H. That shows up once there. So both the encoder and the decoder is a single block. So I'm going to click that twice to bring 2 of them in, and then we'll define which one is the encoder and which one is the decoder and its properties. I also need to add my HDMI devices. So I need to add a generic HDMI display. So I have a single display. I'm going to add that to my inventory. And then I'm going to add my 2 HDMI sources. So I'm going to add 2 sources, and you'll see those will populate in the inventory window. So I can bring in my sources. So here's my source 1. I'm going to just drop those into the design. And then here's my display. I'm going to bring my display block in here. And then I have my 2 NV32s. So I'm going to bring in the IO blocks for them. So here, number 1, I'm going to set this as my encoder. You can see by default, they're both encoders. But if I click on this one on the NV32H2, I can set in its properties. I'm going to set it as the device type, and it's just a drop down. I'll set that as a decoder. And then once I click that, you'll see that its pinout's going to change to allow the different kind of connections for a decoder. And really, all I need to do is I need to wire my sources up. So I know I have a source plugged into HDMI 1 and I have a source plugged into HDMI 2. And on my decoder, I have an output that I'm going to plug into my display. And then you'll notice on the encoder and decoder, you have these triangular inputs and outputs. These are your network streams. So the encoder is capable of encoding 3 network streams simultaneously and then outputting that. And then on the decoder end, I could choose which one of those streams I want to send to my output. So I'm just going to grab that and I'm going to wire those up as well. A couple other things I can do is if I want the audio, by default, the audio is going to be passed over my HDMI and come out of my speakers attached to my display. But in most conference rooms, you're not going to want to do that. You might have in-room speakers. So I'm going to bring these decoder audio outputs right into this mixer I have. So I already have some signal tags. So decoder L and decoder R, and you can see up here, they're already going to this mixer. So those are going to, so the audio, whatever video I have coming out is going to play through my in-room speakers. And that's the simplest way to do it. The audio will just follow the selected video source. There's a lot of different options you have for audio. We can take audio at the source. We could take audio from the encoder. We could strip audio. We could embed audio. So there's a ton of different options we have for audio, but in the simplest sense, this is really the easiest way to do it. So once I have that set up, I just need to now make sure my names match. So if I go back to configurator, I see my two devices. I have one named desk and one named wall. So I just need to go into my endpoint, and this is going to be my encoder. I'm just going to call this desk. My decoder wall. And that should be it. I'm just also going to just grab the status blocks for each of these. Every device in Q-SYS also has a status block where you can get a lot of useful information. And I'm going to grab that because that'll actually let us see what kind of bandwidth we're going to be using on our devices. Once I have that set, I think I'm good to go. I can push this design to my core. I probably just lost my video.
I'm assuming you're pushing it to the core and it's re-recognizing those USB devices. Oh, there it is. Great.
Yep. Sorry, I think I must have lost you when I rebooted.
No problem. As we're waiting, we can take a couple questions. Does the NV pass through any bitstream surround audio on HDMI? Does it do any pass through of that bitstream?
So the NV, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Cool. So the NV will take will only accept PCM audio. So if you have a device that's able to decode, so if you have a Blu-ray player or something that can decode DTS or anything like that and pass it out as 7 or 8 separate channels of PCM audio, the NV can accept those up to 8 channels that way. But it won't do any decoding such as DTS or Dolby. It can't decode those, that type of audio.
Got it.
We also have the question of whether or not you can output a video source to the USB I/O bridge, and whether or not there's any plans for the HDMI port on the core itself. That HDMI port is a nice byproduct of the motherboard that we're using, and it's not to say that you never know what might come with it, but currently no, there's no plan for that HDMI.
Yeah, that HDMI is really just for internal diagnostic purposes, so it doesn't do anything like that.
Yep. Okay.
One more quick question. Can you preview an HDMI source on a UCI?
Not at this time. That is on, there's talk of getting that feature, but currently, no, you can't do that. So can everyone see my my display behind me now?
Yeah,
we can.
Good.
Okay, cool. So these are so right now I have my systems back up. These are just some of the built-in images on the. You could actually load graphics in the system, so we can see the outputting in the decoder. There's some static images there. And now if I pull up some of my, I'm just switching through. So here's my media player, my local media player being passed over the network. And I can just switch between that. And then I have another media player here, or PlayStation. So that's it. So now I have my encoder device and outputting to my video device over the network, my decoder over the network.
That's a similar story for this NV series. That was, I only counted 6 blocks, a little bit of wiring, a lot of us just chatting more than anything. But even with all that, we did both of those things in less than 20 minutes. And keep in mind that, again, for that NV, you've essentially wired that video to anywhere on the network. So you could be passing that video across the entire campus as long as it's on the network.
Right, exactly.
A very critical question coming in, Eric. What game are you currently playing on PlayStation?
Let's see. What's loaded? Let's see here.
Oh, look at there.
Let me switch to my PlayStation. Horizon
Nice.
Zero Dawn.
Nice.
Good work.
Great game.
So this actually I like to show this as a demo because you can see the latency. I could actually play the game without no input lag or anything. And this would actually, if I share my screen again, I could show you guys in real time.
Yep.
Let's see here. So if I open up this status block on my decoder, you'll see under network AV sources, you'll see this this line here, bitrate. So you see it says bitrate right there, where it's about 128. So right now I'm using 128 megabits because I have a somewhat static image on the screen. But you'll see if I go into the game and actually do some action, you'll see that that's going to kind of jump up now, coming close to 600. So you can see the shift codec actually in action.
So in the few remaining minutes, do you want to show people how easy it could be to drag a couple of these controls onto a touchscreen device? Again, like we're not going to, today we're not going to focus a lot on the aesthetic, but we are going to show you how easily you can drag these kind of default buttons onto a Q-SYS touchscreen device and then serve them up to an end user without any programming whatsoever.
Absolutely. So I could grab, so let me see here. So I'm going to grab that. I'm even going to put this bitrate. I'm going to move this onto my, sorry. So I want to grab, so I have to just jump out, go back into design mode. And I'm going to grab this bitrate. And you'll see I'm just dragging these out from their blocks into my schematic window. And let's see, I'm going to grab my AV1, AV2, and I'll even grab the little status lights. And I'm going to take all that. I'm just going to do a cut. I'm going to just do a copy and go over to my UCI, so user control interfaces. And then I have kind of a, let's say an existing UCI that I have in my conference room. So right now I was able to control the audio from my speakers in the room, and then I had some meters for my different audio sources. But I can just literally drop right in here my two buttons. So if I wanted to have this bitrate displayed, I could just bring this right down here and obviously change some of the formatting so it makes it a little bit more presentable. So make that text larger. You go even bigger than that. I can change my text color to get it to match if I want to make it white. And then the same thing with these buttons. I could grab these buttons and let me just get them larger. Yep. And these status LEDs will update depending on if their network stream goes down or something comes unplugged. These will actually show. And then once I have that on there, if I just go ahead and hit F5, it's going to load.
There's core rebooting. His
Yep.
audio will be coming back momentarily.
I can take one of the questions while we're waiting. I think it's pretty obvious. There's no scripting going on for this. So I think the question is, does it require require scripting? It does not. If you're looking to control a display, for example, you could look to see if there were any plugins that are available in the plugin library. But if there are not, there is little bits of scripting that you might have to do, but it's really not heavy lifting in terms of simple display control.
So now on my screen, you should see I have my UCI viewer open. So this is just basically emulating the touch panel that I just added. So now I have these buttons here, and you see I'm switching the video behind me. You can see the bandwidth also changing based on what's happening. So if I was to start playing a video, you should see my bandwidth jump way up. And then obviously if I was back to a static screen, you'll see it go right back down. So it's that easy just to add those controls right to your screen, to your UCI.
Cool. Patrick, so we've got a number of good questions coming in. Do you want to open up some
Yeah, I
discussion?
will. Yeah, let's. I don't remember if we've talked to Kurt before. I'm going to open up Kurt's microphone. He's got a quick question about scaling, whether or not the NV series automatically scales. Kurt, was that the nature of your question?
Yes.
So
I was curious to see if the decoder automatically scales to the display that it's connected to, even though there may be two different displays in a room or in a configuration that have two different resolutions.
correct. So the NV series will follow the EDID that's currently assigned on any given device. You can customize those if you'd like, but it will try to default to whatever that preferred thing is as it's dictated in the EDID.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Next question is Ian. Was Ian one of the gentlemen that didn't have a VoIP, Nate? I can't remember. If not, I can open up Ian for us. He had a question about whether or not this was Unicast or Multicast. And if it's Multicast, are QSC networking switches pre-configured to support this hardware? That's a deep one. I'm going to let Eric address that one.
So, if an encoder is sending a single stream to a decoder, to a single decoder, it will be Unicast. If you're going to send it to multiple decoders, then it will automatically switch over to multicast, and then it'll be a multicast stream. And yes, the Dell switches we sell are already pre-configured with the proper multicast settings, the IGMP snooping settings, and things to support that.
Awesome, thanks.
And we also have white papers on our website for configuring other popular switches out there from Cisco and HP and things like that.
Cool. We have another question. I think it's in relation to tiling, whether or not we can do side-by-side of a media player and a PlayStation on a single screen. And the answer to that is no. No, it does not do tiling at this moment. It's, again, primarily for meeting room content. So if you needed, to do that kind of side by side, we would expect that you'd put another display in. And again, like that kind of tiling is more about it kind of outside the scope of meeting room technology. Any other questions? Oh, I think we did it, guys. We're right here at the top of the hour. I can answer a couple preemptive questions. We're going to send you guys a couple of application guides.
Pop your camera back on, Patrick.
Oh, thank you. I will do that. We're going to send out a couple of application guides that will review some of the things that you saw. If you want to see this video, we're actually going to be posting this in a place where you can go back and rewatch it if you want. We'll include that in the email as well. And if you have any other questions about the upcoming webinars or not being able to get into them, or you want to see more of something, I would encourage you, and maybe Nate can stick it in the chat, go to training.qsc.com, post just a little comment or a question or a suggestion. Oh, we've got one more from Andrew. I'm going to open up Andrew. Andrew, I know you've got a good microphone, so I'm just going to let you ask your question.
Hello.
Yep, I hear you.
All right. So I asked a question earlier about the HDMI feed from the PTZ camera. But in order to get that camera feed onto a local display in the room, you would need to feed the HDMI out of the camera into an NV. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, those two video streams aren't compatible, but HDMI is HDMI. So if you take it out of the back of the camera, you can do whatever you want with it.
Awesome.
The other thing that we'll include in that email, again, we just kind of touched the surface on a couple of these things, but we do have a full training on NV series. So it's if you go on the training website, it's video 101. It goes over everything we went over and more. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that. And if I don't see any other questions,
Nope.
I'm going to bid everybody goodbye. We'll see you on the next webinar. Take it easy, guys. Be safe.
The dog is still asleep.
Ridiculous.